Okay, for this tutorial you're going to learn how to sew a manual buttonhole. And a manual buttonhole means that you're going to use the stitch width and the stitch length on the sewing machine to sew a buttonhole instead of using a buttonhole foot and a preset buttonhole. The reason you would have to do a manual buttonhole is if you have something that's too thick and when you go to sew it, it just sticks and the buttonhole foot doesn't move. This often happens on a denim waistband, like if you were making a pair of jeans and you had to make a simple little buttonhole on that waistband. You couldn't do it with a standard buttonhole foot on your sewing machine. So you're going to have to do it manually. All right, it takes practice. So you have to play with the stitch width and stitch length until you get a nice pattern. Once you have a nice pattern, you don't want it really too close together like you do in a bar tack. A little expanded is better. So the one that you see here actually turned out pretty well. So let's look at how we set up the marks for doing this. Okay, here I have drawn two lines, and this one will indicate the start of the buttonhole. This is going to indicate the end of the buttonhole. Then you have two lines that go down from the top to the bottom, and you want about 1/8 of an inch apart. And this is the spacing so that when you cut the buttonhole, you will actually be able to cut between and not accidentally cut the stitches. So the purpose of this is to sew over these two lines until you get down to the bottom. And then you're going to come back to your second one, start at the top, sew to the bottom, and then you're going to change your sewing machine to a wide zigzag for closing, and then go back to the top and sew a wide zigzag for also closing the top. So let's go ahead and get started. So take your sampler, stick it under your sewing machine, lower the needle where the two lines cross, and you want those lines there because it's going to help you sew straight, and it also gives you a guide. So starting at the top, sew to the bottom, and this is going to be the length of your buttonhole. The nice thing about doing a manual buttonhole, you can make any length you want, so that's really a great advantage. Buttonhole foot is limited to 1-inch button. Okay, when you get to your cross line, stop. Go ahead and remove this from the sewing machine. You can cut the threads on both sides. Always cut your threads off. It's going to keep everything neat and you'll be able to see much more clearly. Now you're going to go back and sew the second side of the buttonhole. So again, put your needle in where those two lines intersect. And I'm basically sewing over the line, and this allows me to sew straight. So continuing the second side of the buttonhole. Sew at a moderate speed. Do not sew real fast. Your sewing machine is going to function much more smoothly if you sew at a nice steady pace, but not too quickly. Okay, when you get to the bottom, leave the needle in an up position and then move your stitch width slider so that you can make the wide stitch at the bottom. Now I pick up my presser foot and I slide it just like 1/16 of an inch. All right, now you're ready to start. Sew 3 or 4 stitches, stop, remove it. Again, I'm going to cut all the threads, keep everything neat so I can see where I'm sewing. I even cut them on the back side. Okay, now we're ready to close the top. So you're going to do the same thing. So put the needle in at the top of where the two lines intersect. Lower the presser foot and sew the wide stitch across the top. Okay, you can backstitch. Okay. And the machine stops. Remove it. Cut your threads. Now you have a manual buttonhole. And the nice thing about it is when you go to cut it, and this is the way I like to cut, I fold in half, take and cut a small hole down the middle. I lay it flat, and then I cut to the end. Turn it around, cut to the other side, and if you feel like you have too much fabric in here, you can trim some of that out, and your buttonhole is ready to go.